Thanks, Rosie. Cool. So leading on to what we're going to chat about today. Our art sector is crumbling as a result of the pandemic, and the government is doing nothing about it. So a year since our first national lockdown now, and our creative industries are in complete crisis. We've got film and television production as being put on a complete hold. Live performance venues, museums, galleries, everywhere has been forced to close their doors. And these industries are experiencing a huge loss of income and loss of tens of thousands of jobs. And more are still at risk. And of course, self-employed creatives, they've struggled. There's been zero protection or almost zero protection, absolutely meagre financial bailouts. And so many arts and creative projects have been struggling to be kept afloat. So something has to be done. But what? So that's our question we're going to be answering today. So we have lined up a hopefully a very insightful discussion. I am sure it's going to be. So it's going to be a bit more of a conversational feel today than others. So we've got, first of all, the frontman of the Subways, Billy Lunn, and
hello.
Hey, and we have the deputy leader of the Green Party, Amelia Womack. The format of today's event is going to be where Amelia and Billy are going to have a bit of a conversation. And then while they are chatting, if you have any questions that you would like to pose to them at the end, then if you can send them over to me, I've got Jane questions here. If you send them over to me in the chat, then I'll amalgamate them all together and then we'll ask them at the end. So that's going to be all from me. I think I'm now going to hand straight over to Amelia to kick us off for what will be an inspiring conversation.
Thanks so much, Jane, and thank you for organising this. It's such an important and poignant time to be talking about the arts. Although we've been saying that for the last 10 years, as austerity had already devastated so much of the art sector. And what's happened with COVID is this real contrast between a lot of politicians and many people thinking that the arts are kind of a nice to have versus the reality of where we've been right now and where we're going, where the arts have been the lifeline for so many, whether that's been books or music or Netflix and films. We've all taken advantage of the artistic talent of so many people to keep us going through these lockdowns. And that's something to be cherished and something to be valued. And I don't know about you. What are you thinking about when you imagine the end of all of this? What is the first thing you're going to, well, the first thing you're going to do is have a pint, probably. What's the thing that you're looking forward to doing more than anything? Because for me, most of those things are based around the arts. It's drinking a beer in a festival, in front of music, and experiencing all the incredible things that the arts bring us. It's doing my regular trip to the Edinburgh Fringe. It's going to art galleries. It's visiting even things like libraries, not just a place for research, but a place for inspiration. All of these things have been consistently devalued and undermined in so many different ways. We saw the cuts of austerity really cutting away the fabric of our art sector and making it seem, once again, like that, this is the nice to have. In good times, we can have the arts, but, times are tough and it doesn't bring value, which to me is just a complete misconception of the arts, which in so many cases are the lifeblood of our communities, whether that's gig venues, whether that's the museums, libraries. So much happens as a result of that sector. But we've seen another stake through the heart of the art sector in the way that we've seen politicians talk about even education in arts, as if because it doesn't always lead to a job, that it's not something that we should be like investing in, that we should be encouraging, that we should be supporting young people with. Obviously, we shouldn't just be valuing talent based on how much money it makes, but it also devalues the art sector in the amount of jobs that it does create, It's one of the biggest economies in the UK because there is so much behind one single arts event, whether that's the technicians, whether that's the people playing, whether it's the people who are selling tickets in the box office. It's just an incredible network of people who are, of jobs and opportunities. But also the arts bring something to us. They shouldn't have to put a value on it. It shouldn't be about money. And I feel like I have heard so many people talk about how they have given up on passions that they had, from drawing to embroidery, or like, obviously a lot of people have taken up knitting again recently, but whether that's their musical instruments. There are so many different things that people have given up on because they've been told that it's almost like a waste of time if it doesn't make you money. And it just completely destroys what art is. And it's about expression, and it's about so much more than just this financial aspect that I feel so many politicians, mostly conservative, obviously you'll remember how UKIP tried to say that there should be that there should be higher tuition fees for those studying the arts, as if the arts once again was just something that was a hindrance almost to education rather than a core part of what we should be teaching people. So much opportunity's been lost, and it's not just because of COVID. COVID has been devastating. And I know I can see that people on this call have worked in arts. I can see people who have had gigs cancelled. I know one person's got a very early gig in Bristol coming up, which I'm hoping is going to go ahead. And I think that what we've seen is that there are people who are working to get their work out there in the arts sector are often also the people who have been in the most unpredictable work, often on 0-hour contracts, might be working in bars or catering, and they've had a double blow as a result of COVID, because not only have they lost income or lost avenues of work through the ending of events and all kinds of gigs, but also because their core work has been lost as well. It's left an entire industry that, I'm just going to say again, the entire industry that's been a lifeline for us, and I know that I'm not alone in feeling that, on its knees, with no reflection of what it brings to each of us, with kind of token amounts of investment rather than a real reflection of what it brings, why it's essential. And I think that looking forward, not only should we be seeing investment in arts. I mean, being Greens, we always want to see far more community investment and bringing kind of power and money down to the most local level, so that we can, our towns or our cities, however big or small they are, can flourish with things like with things like art and music and comedy. And we need that investment. We need to see how we rebuild our communities after this, how we rebuild that connection. I feel through music and my experiences of going to music venues, one thing I really love about it is the diversity it often brings, with people from so many different ages, backgrounds, cultures coming together for a love and passion of one thing. And that's what community is about. And I feel like more investment in how we create that is so vital and important. We'll probably talk about some other issues as well throughout this, but I just we keep saying, you know, what do we build out of this? And I know that people are thinking about big ideas in very different ways at the moment, whether that's things like a Green New Deal or a universal basic income. Many of these solutions feel like the answer because the problems seem so massive. But I also hope that the big ideas we come to really explore what we've learned to value as a result of the lockdown experience. And I hope that we don't continue to play politics with those things that have been so vital, and those things that bring so much more than just talking about money. That's kind of a vague introduction. Billy, I don't know if you want to do an introduction yourself, or
I won't, because I can't compare to that, but I will I will bring up a few points that you mentioned, Amelia, that really struck me. One of them was that for me anyway, for a really long time as an artist, someone who really wanted to be an artist growing up, but had to constantly be convinced that this was a worthwhile endeavor. I grew up in on a council estate, in a family on benefits. Both my parents were unfortunately out of work. They were uneducated. I relied on state schooling, the NHS, and a lot of community outreach. Social community youth venues like the Square in Harlow, which was essential for me, not just in sort of forming myself as a musician, but actually sort of forming myself as a person. I sort of came of age in that place. I met all my best friends there. I met my wife there. I'm still in contact, even though the venue is now a pile of rubble in Harlow in Essex. We still deeply ashamed of what happened to that place, and it was all because of austerity. But growing up and wanting to be an artist, wanting to do this thing, which, like you say, does involve so many people, and it's not just the artists on stage, it's all the crew members as well. Some people grow up dreaming of being lighting engineers or sound engineers, or just touring crew members. And because of the number of people that are involved in the music industry, that's a reason why year after year the music industry in the UK generates £6 billion. And it grows every single year. And if you want to talk about, I know you mentioned UKIP, but one of the great talking points for UKIP over the last couple of years, particularly to do with Brexit, has been the fishing industry. And it's dominated discourse to the point where you can't say that Brexit's a bad idea, because what about the fishermen? And if you compare the £6 billion per year that the music industry alone creates for the GDP, if we're going to just talk in terms of numbers and fiscal revenue, the shipping and fishing industry only generates 446 million per year. And so there's a real disparity there in the attention that's being given these various industries and sectors, and actually what they need and what they will generate. So I feel like there are other sectors that don't necessarily generate as much fiscally, also probably don't generate as much culturally, or for the good of the mental health of the nation, but they are not being ignored in the same way that the arts are being ignored during this crisis. But growing up, it was a real common experience for me and my friends at the Square in Harlow before it was destroyed, to just feel unworthy, to want this dream of being an artist, of being a musician, or wanting to get into film, or just generally to get on tour because you wanted to get out of the place in which you grew up and you wanted to see new sights. And the music industry was a way to seek out those endeavors. But we've kind of been conditioned from a very early age to just kick ourselves if we are in the industry and we are able to pay the bills and buy bread and milk, to just say, you must be thankful because this is a privilege. This isn't this isn't a worthy industry to be in. This isn't like any other industry, which is largely society-wide considered utilitarian, when actually, if you think about it, music does help people in such fundamental ways. I know that music has personally helped me through many a mental health crisis, and I know it does the same for others. And the cultural benefits and the philosophical benefits of the arts industry exceed any number that the government can come up with, which they have happily been ignoring up to this point. So yeah, it's deeply worrying. But I draw on another point that you made, Amelia, which is that what's happening in the pandemic at the moment isn't anomalous. The way that the arts industry is being completely ignored is par for the course. It's just the way that the arts has been beheld in the eye of the public, and particularly in the eye of the government, and definitely in the eye of the press, since at least 2010, when Tories took government. Venue closures were coming about at an exponential rate. I remember there was one particular tour. I don't know if it was anything to do with my band especially, but we, on a few occasions, we were the last band to play at that venue forever. You know, we finished up, we packed up, and they said, well, that's it. You know, there was a venue called, I think it was in Yeovil, called the Orange Box, and they said, thanks guys, that was it. You know, that was the last gig of 25 years of this place, and now we're shutting down for good because we just can't carry on. And a lot of these places are dependent on council funding and arts council funding or government subsidy, because, you know, unlike commercially driven or utilitarian industries, they're not there for the sole purpose of you know, making profit, because profit isn't the aim of the game in the arts. The aim of the game is to imbue people with a sense of purpose and meaning, to make them feel justified about themselves, their abilities, regardless of where that you know, those abilities lie, if it's technical or artistic. And even if it is artistic, it doesn't necessarily have to be anything to do with pop music. I think what you can see when Tory governments do come around is that the default setting in the music industry tends to happen because people feel that money is the sole aim of being in a band, so they drive for the center ground, and you lose out on a lot of left field artists, a lot of very experimental artists that are the ones that tend to push the envelope, you know, artists that are more abstract expressionist, for want of a better phrase. So yeah, I think that what we're going through now in the pandemic is kind of really an amplification or a mirroring of what's happened over the long term since 2010, where the Tory government came in. They implemented crippling ideology-driven austerity measures, which included cuts in funding for the arts, from community centres, outreach programmes, school curriculums, arts council grants, that I foresee will affect younger generations of artists for I don't know how many years. It's going to be indefinite, and the cultural cost is going to be inordinate. And I kind of look back to a time when we had a more investment-driven government in the Labour government, whose key policy was education, education, education. And I remember attending from 1996 until 2001. That's how old I am. And over the course of that time, when I was at my state comp, buildings, you know, we had a new music block being built for us. We had a new arts block being built for us. And it made me want to take music for a GCSE. It made me want to take drama for a GCSE. And actually, you know, I enjoyed being in those blocks so much. I quit football for good, and I'd spend all lunchtime and all after school in those blocks making sounds, you know, making paintings and drawings. And I probably, you know, if I hadn't have seen those buildings blossom, and the faculty of those areas of the school, you know, feature so much investment, you know, the instruments that those rooms were packed with, it was just like a cornucopia for me. So, and I actually had to fight to take drama and music. My tutor, my form tutor, was saying I had to take a humanity, and I made a case for drama being a humanity. So, but that's kind of the gist of where I think we are at the moment, is that I didn't, when I saw that we musicians and artists were going to be ignored yet again, it was kind of like, well, yeah, you know, I go over to Europe and it just feels like, apart from the heartbreaking advent that was Brexit, and all of a sudden feeling for the first time in my life like I'm isolated on an island. But it is, now that I look at going over to Europe, I kind of see just how culturally and wildly different it is. In France, they have They have a scheme whereby if you play a certain number of shows a year, you are subsidized by the government, because they know that it's not just about the gig, it's about the people taking the public transport to get to the gig. It's about the bars that are making money because people are turning up and drinking and they're eating. And it's about the number of people that will go out the next day and buy albums. And they will use public transport to go to the shops. And it's money that's being put back into the economy because people are attending these gigs, because they are leaving these places different people, new people, inspired people. But over here, it seems like the arts is something that is negligible. It's something that we need not do without. But we tend to forget. And you look at the makeup of the front bench of this government, and they're all Eton, Oxford, and I make that reference in a new song, by the way. They're all Eton and Oxford, and they've all learnt the classics, but none of them seem to remember Plato's Republic, where an argument was made for the essential requirement of the arts in society. So yeah, I find that quite ironic. But yeah. There was another point that I was going to mention, but I can't seem to pull it out of my brain. So I'm so sorry.
In case it pops back, it would actually be also good to hear about the realities of Brexit in the music industry, of what borders mean. And I feel that musicians especially were failed by Brexit, because it's completely undermines the opportunities that so many people have had to travel and work internationally and spread their music.
Yeah, well, I still harbor a lot of resentment for that period between 2016 and now, where I was constantly making the argument online that Brexit is going to severely hamper the live music industry. And unfortunately, from a small section of our fans, I would receive messages saying, "Oh, you elitist, you." And this is the perception of the arts in the UK, and it's not actually no one over in Europe says that about artists. They know that we're poor, but for some reason over here in the UK, you are lucky to be in the arts. Oh, goody, goody for you. But I was saying that this is really going to affect this. It's going to affect bands in the UK that dream of going abroad. And because bands go abroad and they're successful there, it obviously brings attention to the UK. People want to come over to the UK and see their favorite bands play in their home country. The export of the UK music industry is world renowned. We have some of the greatest artists in the world are UK based. And there's a reason for that, is because we have a culture that's built up over the last half a century in the pop industry and in left field and abstract expressionist art. I'd get a lot of people saying, "Oh, you elitist," and you'll be fine. All you need is just you'll just need to fill in a few more visas. And it's like, well, if what you're saying is that we have to fill in more forms and get more visas, or say a visa for every single country that we visit, and when we go over to Europe, we visit France, Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Switzerland, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Spain, Italy, Portugal. The list is, it's huge. So if we're required to sign up for visas for each and every country in the same way that we're required to do that for America, it's gonna disincentivize artists from actually making the effort to do that. And what's that going to do? That's going to lower the cultural capital of the UK abroad. And the reason we're doing this is for national sovereignty and to save money and all these various things, and make Britain great again. We're kind of riding that wave. That Brexit just felt like make Britain great again. And if anything, all it's doing is diminishing the UK as a cultural power. let alone stopping us from doing our jobs and making the UK money.
I think that kind of what Britain is, that national identity thing. I'm sometimes reminded of that speech in Love Actually, where Hugh Grant talks about, you know, why we're a strong country. And he's just like, it's Shakespeare and Harry Potter and like James Bond and all of these things that are actually just like the arts. And it is so interesting how try and kind of create a nationalist argument about why Britain is great. Actually, he refers to things that have been completely undermined by conservative governments and by politicians.
Absolutely.
And how the reflection of how that's like always comes across as this like powerful speech, but it's kind of ironic in its own sense.
But it's also like, just to pick up on the nationalist sense, I mean, this is the thing, is that we have this nationalist pride, or the right and Brexiteers have this nationalist pride thing. And so they invoke Harry Potter, and you're like, yeah, but Harry Potter plays on Nordic mythology and Germanic mythology and Latin, Greco-Roman mythology. Shakespeare is indebted to Petrarch. And his all-time favorite piece of literature was Ovid's Metamorphoses. Like, we are tied in intimately and intricately with the culture outside these isles. We owe something to Europe, and you know, as a consequence, Europe owes something to us, and it's a symbiotic relationship that's been built over millennia. So this idea that no, Shakespeare was just, you know, he was English and he was great because he was English. No, he was great because the Renaissance movement came over from Europe to the UK shores, and we took that on and did something with it. So yeah, I find it's a very blinkered notion and a very reductive notion, and a cut-off notion of what it is to be British. Actually, being British is being international by definition.
Absolutely, and I think I didn't know about a lot of those points, and it just is always really inspiring how we are so much richer as a result of being connected with our nearest neighbours, really. Oh, I don't think I'm ever going to recover from Brexit.
I know. Like, my spirit has been I feel like I've got used to it, but it was spirit crushing. I'm kind of glad that in 2016, when it all happened, I went off to uni. You know, we played our last few shows in 2016 over the summer after Brexit happened. I remember we got off the bus the day after the vote came in Germany, and we walked through backstage at a German festival, and everybody was just looking at us and thinking, wow, like, you know, it's a big thing that's happened. And it said everything, that we were loading up in England to go over to Germany and play this festival, and we're talking to our bus driver, a bus driver whose job is about getting on a bus, taking a group of musicians over the channel to then drive around Europe. He voted for Brexit, and we looked at him in utter astonishment, thinking, you realize that you've screwed your own job, your own livelihood is dependent on like getting on this tour bus and driving us around Europe. And it was I just remember thinking it was just one hell of a shot in the foot, you know. And all of a sudden, all those people who were saying, oh, you're talking Brexit down and Project Fear, well, they're oddly quiet at this point in time. But yeah.
I also feel like, so I was at Glastonbury
Right.
that weekend, and I feel like if you're going to organise the biggest referendum that, you know, for a generation, organising it at the same time as one of the UK's biggest music festival, where you know, the equivalent of a city the size of Swindon pops up in a field in Somerset where there's no access to ballot boxes, it just shows how little the people really consider the impact, of all these things, that the cultural events that happen in this country that could have influenced that, or maybe they did. Who knows? I was just going to talk about UBI very quickly before we go to questions. Billy and I worked on a letter to Rishi Sunak about a universal basic income and what that brings to the arts. Something that we've championed a long time as the Green Party. It was one of our founding principles, was a universal basic income back in the 1970s. And fundamentally, it will transform society. But personally, I think it's really valuable for arts and culture. Billy, would you want to say a bit about why it inspired you so much?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up in a working class family, council housed, where when I first started out making music, I'd left school. I didn't want to go into my job too early, so I decided to take a theatre studies course for 2 years. And after I graduated from that, I went straight into work, and I was collecting dirty sheets from the hotel rooms, and I was trying to at the same time support my parents, who were both out of work. My dad didn't learn to read or write until he was 23. When he met my mum, he had no qualifications. My mum left school with no qualifications. They were for a long time both self-employed, and then my dad came down with depression. My mum had to look after him, and so I kind of had to make a choice, which was I knew I was never really going to go to university, which is why I ended up going as a mature student a couple of years ago. But for me, it was a choice of, I could try and be a musician, which was my dream and which I wanted to manifest into reality, or I could go into work. And I went into part-time work, which meant that times were really, really tough. And during that period, I had to also aspire to be a musician, and I accrued a lot of debt. But I also ran out of energy. I was utterly exhausted by the age of 19, because I was at a point where I had to make the decision of whether I was going to continue making music, or whether I was going to just try and bite the bullet and get a full-time job, because it was unsustainable. And through sheer luck, plus a lot of hard work, but I happen to think that we've benefited from a lot of luck in our career. We were sort of scouted and then picked up to play the Glastonbury Unsigned Bands competition, after which we decided to quit our jobs and go off on tour. And by the end of the tour, we were signed. And that was a really intense couple of months, which would either have made or broke us, and we were lucky that it made us. But if we were recipients of something like universal basic income, that sort of split decision, that life-changing, life-altering decision between a life spent doing something that I wasn't made for, that I didn't want to do, and that thing that I really truly wanted to do, and that I thought was going to keep me living. I was a very depressed child, and I needed music. It was my air, it was my water and my food. And I can't really envisage a life without it. I can't see myself quite existing without the joy that music gives me. And I look back and I think, if I was on universal basic income, if I knew that I had a certain amount of money that was always coming in, then I could try and do this thing that I really cared about, whilst being able to sustain myself without having to worry about whether my parents were going to eat or drink that day, without worrying whether I was on the road to ruin. So I think that, drawing from my own personal experience, but also looking at the wider society-wide benefits of what a universal basic income will provide. I mean, all you have to do is look at austerity measures. We can see that a government that doesn't invest in its economy, doesn't invest in its people, doesn't invest in its sectors, will ultimately not reap any rewards, that there will be another surge of inflation. There'll be another surge of boom and bust. And I think in order to reach some semblance of balance, people need to feel that they have something to spend, something which they can then reinvest into the economy, and which keeps things turning over. So for me, it makes absolute sense, is that if you give people some money in their pockets, they will save and later invest, or they will just invest. And it just makes absolute sense to me. And one of the reasons why I can foresee why maybe right wingers or super capitalists wouldn't want this kind of thing happening is because their interests depend upon scarcity. Their interests depend upon deprivation. And as long as they keep that vacuum in place, they protect their wealth, which means that they protect their power. But a universal basic income disperses power. It elevates those who before were powerless, before were homeless. I mean, a universal basic income could essentially completely do away with homelessness. And can you imagine what it must be like for someone who has absolutely nothing? I know, I talk a lot, and I mentioned earlier about, it's easy to fall into this way of thinking that, yes, I'm very lucky to be a musician, I'm very privileged. And at the same time, I am incredibly privileged because I've benefited from my intersectional privileges of being a white cis male. I was working class, but at the same time, I benefited from a government that was willing to invest in social housing and the working classes. But if you provide people with something to spend, with something that will allow them to find a foothold and then make something of themselves, the economy will simply blossom. It's just pure it's pure logic as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure you've got much more sort of efficacious and stats based information that you can provide, Amelia, but that's kind of my my very Whiggish way of seeing it anyway.
Well, I think it's just so vital and important. One thing that really strikes me is, people's perception of who you are and what you do. It's not like I was going to kind of, it's not like you've come from a privileged position where you've kind of benefited from a trust fund or something like that.
No.
It's one take have kind of situation where you've worked incredibly hard, and the fact that people feel like you talk from a point of privilege just really shows how to me everybody should feel like there should be an opportunity in the arts. And I think that it's because they feel that you're privileged because you have taken that opportunity when maybe they've had their dreams crushed for a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
And not everyone will have a career in the arts, but like the other benefits that come from that are just again kind of going back to what you were talking about before, the mental health, the well-being aspects. There are so many other points, and we grew up at a similar time, and you forget that there is an advantage to growing up under a Labour government that thinks quite differently. Obviously it would be great if with a Green government, we would be looking at education from the point of people exploring their talents rather than just being, churning out exam results and things like that. But
I think one of the benefits and one of the great things about, the Green Party is that you're not beholden to the kind of the centrist idealism of pandering to a certain select few. It feels like the Green Party is what I essentially want to do in the music industry is sweeping aside the gatekeepers and allowing everybody a voice on an equal footing, and it's like true equity. And that's why I, as far in my heart of hearts, I would absolutely adore a green government, because it's a holistic change which I think society needs, that the Green Party can offer, which doesn't, obviously you tap right into my inclinations when it concerns like the arts industry and the economy, but also we're facing a climate crisis at the moment, which I think we artists can participate in, and spreading a positive message about, incentivizing greener ways of living our lives, on a broader way.
Brilliant. I feel like we should go to questions. So Jane, do you want to throw some questions our way?
Yeah, thank you so much. Did I see a Zoom round of applause? I don't know, use the emojis or how that was just incredible. Thank you so much, so insightful. And like, I know I have listened to you both speak about this for hours before, which is why I was so excited to have you again. But just such a fascinating discussion. So thank you so much for starting off. Oh, look at all the clap emojis. See, we know how to do it in the younger.
No.
But yeah, thank you so much. We've also got loads of questions coming through, and I will try to amalgamate them and send them your way, and apologies if you don't get to ask all of them, but thank you for sending them through. And I thought I would kick off with a really big one for fun. Which kicks off with, firstly, thank you for your amazing talk. You've mentioned in France, amongst other countries, the indirect economic advantages of gigs as recognised by the government, and that this recognition materialises in subsidies. However, the non-economic advantage of the arts have rightly been highlighted throughout this talk. So the big question that they have for you is, do you think that on a fundamental level, capitalism as it is incompatible with the arts, the cultural and societal and well-being benefits? Since I'm throwing this one out because it's been this kind of underlying theme of our lecture series that people have just sort of ended with, so I thought it was a really nice movement. So a kind of question about the tensions between capitalism and the kind of real benefits of the arts. Over to you and good luck.
Well, I tend to find that capitalism as an ideology fetishizes things. So rather than seeking the value of an object in and of itself, it becomes something which is marketized, has a price tag placed on it, and the market determines its value, not people, not society. So I think the arts would greatly benefit from the eradication of the capitalist structure, as well as a huge number of other sectors as well. I think that capitalism is getting in the way of the freedom movement of women. I think that the sexualization of women is a function of the capitalist mode. Marketizing women has been a purely money-making scheme since the dawn of time. So if we could exist beyond the capitalist structure, I think what we would do is we would escape or extricate ourselves from this idea of functioning in a society where things are realized for their speculative value rather than their intrinsic value. So, I mean, I watched an absolutely fantastic documentary recently. I am awful with names. I can't remember what it was, but it's about
in the YouTube thing later. We can just like insert clip. Like
yes, okay. But it was about the marketization of abstract expressionist art in the late 20th century, or mid to late 20th century. And essentially what it did is it reduced what was a primal experience in the arts to John Berger talks about this, about art galleries and the acquisition of arts and the separation of arts from society by thrusting them into galleries and then making them only visible to a certain kind of person. It hierarchizes access to the arts, when I think art should exist on a you should be able to walk out your front door and see on a wall a piece of art. That's why I'm obsessed with graffiti. I love it. I think it's one of society's greatest accomplishments. If you see a piece of graffiti, it's a part of the architecture of society. You know, it's an expression, and if someone disagrees with it, they graffiti over the top of it. You know, it's a discussion that society has with itself, undertaken by artists. So you know, my ultimate dream is to completely, especially where it concerns the arts, but generally do away with the pound sign or the euro sign or the dollar sign. And you know, the dream is to have people who live a way of life that is an artistic way of life. So their lifestyle is driven by the art that they make, and it doesn't depend upon the fetishization of that piece of art. It doesn't depend upon someone's ownership of it, because it's a society-owned product in Marxist terminology anyway. So yeah, I think that the capitalist system is something that is you know, it created racism essentially. You know, it created division between the sexes. It's now, at the moment, it's created an influencer class that is taking discourse away from society and is marketizing it, and that's all that's doing, is it's pitting marginalized groups against each other. So yeah, I think it's a huge issue, a huge problem, but at the same time, I understand, and I'm ever cognizant of it, because, you know, we all need to have money to spend. Whilst we're in this system, we have to function within it. But that doesn't mean that we can't criticize it. A lot of people tend to criticize me talking about anti-capitalist sentiments, saying, "Oh yeah, but you charge someone a certain amount of." I'm like, yeah, because I have a mortgage, I have dogs I need to feed. You know, just because I live within the capitalist structure doesn't mean that I approve of it. So yeah, there you go.
Amazing, thank you so much.
I really like the point on graffiti as well. I love graffiti, and I think it's just really, and street art, things like that. I think it's really interesting that it's deemed okay that Coca-Cola can spread their adverts over our walls because they're paying for it. But artistic expression is frowned upon, and sometimes painted over by councils who don't realise that they've just become art critics.
Yeah, the worst kind as well. But this is it. I mean, what we have at the moment is a huge imbalance between what is visible, what should be visible, and what's been made obscene. You know, you go on Instagram, something which is like a product of the hyper-capitalist society, which is driven by money and driven by the bottom line and driven by advertisement. And you can't see a woman's nipple on it, but what you can see is extreme violence. What you can see is examples of serious oppression. So, you know, what these systems and these products of these systems do is that they try and they've heavily distorted our ways of seeing ourselves, of seeing each other. They've distorted our ways of being able to appreciate each other as human beings rather than objects. So yeah, it's but graffiti, I don't think there's enough of it, and I get really unfazedly angry when I see it being scrubbed away, especially, you know, if it's something of a sentiment that's about liberation and equality. I mean, I'm overjoyed when I see fascist graffiti being scrubbed away, beyond compare.
One thing I'd say with that question as well is how well, obviously capitalism has failed in so many ways, but also we really fail who we are when we use GDP as a measure, and this idea that money is going to be the answer to everything. It's been within the last 100 years since we started to do this, and it really breaks what we value as important. And you know, you could just, once again, in the framework of the pandemic, what is this proof that a country is doing well? It's not the GDP, it's that people didn't starve, it's that people didn't die, it's that, well, those people who, you know, are struggling with their mental health issues, or who so too many people have died because of their mental health issues, they should have been supported. That's well-being and wellness as a measure of how well a country is doing is far better than a measure using GDP, which is just reflecting the movement of money. It's not reflecting the lives of the people there.
I have this constant tussle going on in my mind, which is, if we don't have the economic fiscal argument on our side, or if we're armed with the knowledge, say, I mean, off the top of my head, going back to the pandemic, the UK government gave 1.57 billion to the creative arts industry, but no actual artists saw it. That was all to do with the infrastructure of the creative arts industry. So it was buildings and upkeep and maintenance. No artists saw any of that. In relation, the government, Rishi Sunak was over. I'm so pleased to announce 1.57 billion, and expecting everyone to go absolutely head over heels in love with him for it. And you look at the German government, they've just earmarked 50 billion euros for freelance artists and arts-based SMEs, alongside other measures such as basic insurance, support for families with children, and tax relief. And the UK won't see anything like that at all. But we have been utterly convinced, and yet we've been utterly convinced that it's all about money. So yeah, I'm constantly like, money shouldn't be a part of this argument. What should be part of the argument, exactly as you said, Amelia, is, are people happy? Are they enjoying their lifestyles? Are they feeling loved? Like these are, we have such a short lifespan on this earth, and we are, from the cradle to the grave, obsessed with the acquisition of money. I think we should just look beyond that. It's so important.
I've just got one more point, which I hope I can share, because I appreciate we're running out of time and there's probably lots of questions.
Don't worry, it was a big question.
I'm so sorry. I do ramble on as well. I'm awful. But
No, so good.
It's all amazing. So it's keep rambling. Not that you are. So I was reading a book by Polly Higgins on ecocide, and in that she talks about how the calculations that people make on the value of nature and put a financial figure on it. The nature brings however many billions of pounds to the economy. And she reflects on it and says that apparently during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King stopped them doing that on Black people. They stopped them saying what Black people bring to the economy, because he was saying that it then just only values people through the money that they bring, rather than their right to exist and their right to life and their right to happiness. And I think there are many conversations that you can have where that's true. I mean, I think, we put a value on the arts industry, it brings X amount to the economy, and it's just, it puts it within that framework that we know is broken immediately, and we end up playing that same system.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
Thank you so much. That was like so interesting. I just want to continue on this, but I'm going to move us to another. But hey, look, we've tackled completely shifting perspectives on the arts. Tick. So that's what I want to start off with. But so thank you so much for that conversation, because it was so insightful and so valuable. And I think, Billy, you managed to roll through 3 volumes of Capital in your first answer. Tremendous work. So thank you so much. And we've got a load of questions coming, but I thought maybe I'd just pick up on your point, Billy, about one that's kind of quite relevant, around the fact that Rishi Sunak put forward this 1.7 billion, and it, but where did it actually go? And there's some kind of questions we've had coming in about, how do we save the arts, kind of in the most immediate sense? What do we push for? And someone's actually also asked, looking forward, what should the model be for arts, and for arts to operate? What should the funding model be? And they've added on the end, in a slightly biased perspective, how do we ensure it doesn't just get spent on ballet and opera and actually funds culture people want to engage with?
That's true.
So go for it.
That's a great caveat, and I think that that's a big problem. I think that the idea that that, and we're still trying to break free of this idea of high and low art, and at first, or over the last couple of millennia, the definition between high and low art is about tragedy and comedy. So comedy is the low art and tragedy is high art. So, you know, you go to the ballet and you go to the opera and all these very aristocratic forms of art experience are considered high art, and they tend to get the money. But at the same time, they're usually the ones that are already really well funded. And what we actually need is grassroots funding. We need to re-erect these community centres that have been demolished over the last 10 years. We need to re-establish the venues that have closed their doors over the last 10 years and at an alarming rate over the last 10 months. And that's it. You know, I think if we invest in these kinds of places, in comedy stores, in function rooms, even in theatrical organizations and academies that take place in the local town hall. Those are where we really need to be sending our money, because it's about young people. I know that that's kind of an ageist idea, and art doesn't really stop. It never, you know, I like to remind myself of, you know, some of my favorite authors of all time only started writing in their 50s, and you know, that maybe we should completely do away with this idea that actually that all the funding should go to youth centers, that we should encourage people of all ages to be going to these community centers and engaging in various kinds of genre. You know, I have a dream that you see pensioners turning up for a grime workshop or something like that. But I joke, not really, but that's where the money should be going, because that's going straight to the artist. That's the foundational, you know, that's where people would be spending their money. You know, usually if you're of a middle or upper class, you will be paying for a tutor and that kind of thing. And that's why you've seen the rise in middle class artists over the last 10 years, or you've seen a boom in nepotism. You look on Netflix now, and every other show you've got, oh, okay, that's the daughter of that incredibly wealthy and incredibly renowned artist or singer or actor. So they really need to go to grassroots areas. And I think that needs to spread across the sports sector as well. We need more money going to local football clubs, rugby clubs, athletics. I mean, athletics is terribly overlooked. You know, and you just can't believe the good it can do to a working class or someone of a marginalized background when they arrive, and their abilities lie there. They're not academic, they're not artistic, but they're a sports person, and they need that talent to be validated, because it can be a way of life, and it should be a way of life. We should be indulging this, and we should all be relishing it as well. So yeah, that's my view on it.
Fantastic, thanks so much. I don't know if Amelia, you wanted to jump in on that one as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, taking the funding down to the local level, and you know, thinking really creatively about how we benefit people in different ways, and how we encourage people to take up experiences in the arts in different ways. So there shouldn't really be tax on going to performances. It should just be one of the things that we in this world as it stands, we're always encouraged to buy things. And I think that making experiences accessible in a different way is so vital and important to make sure that it's accessible to more people. In the 2015 general election, we were criticised for talking about how we tax superstar performers to ensure that grassroots are being supported. It was dubbed by the right-wing press as the Beyonce tax, which I do quite like, because, you know, there are so many superstar performers that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the small music venues and the smaller artists. Many of those performers have come through those small venues, and giving a little bit back is so vital and important to make sure that we're creating the next generation of musicians and artists. So I think that we need to promote and encourage local art by bringing that money down to the local level, but also just being thoughtful about how we make it accessible. And I think that ending VAT on things like performances is really vital in doing that.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, thanks so much. And actually, as we you were just like highlighting this, one of the questions that came through was kind of like also bringing out the kind of question on diversity in the arts as well. And like, yeah, they're just in case you wanted to add anything, but this question that's come in says there has been a discussion on diversity in the arts that is drastically reduced over the past few decades due to the prevalence of unpaid internships in order to get experience and fill holes in the sectors. So, but you can only access those if you have the financial backing. And so someone has just asked, what would be your kind of like other immediate solutions for tackling this in the immediate future? That kind of get that step ladder.
Yeah, I think that requires holistic change. And I think, as I said earlier, and this is a really important point, you know, we've got a, I'm not allowed to announce it yet, but but we're doing something, and it's the first thing we're doing in over 5 years. But what we are doing is using our privileged position as a way to hand over the microphone to marginalized communities so that they can speak their truth and experiences. And I don't think enough white artists are doing that at the moment, especially allegedly socially minded bands. And they've kind of been forced into this position of going, actually, you know, we've been doing this for 10 years now, but, you know, shouldn't you maybe, if you consider yourselves, all 5 of you guys are feminists and you haven't ever taken a band featuring a woman on tour, don't you think that that's, you know, I think it's really important to do feminism or to do equality rather than just to preach it. So I think a holistic change needs to happen. I think a huge problem with access to the arts, and especially sports, and incredibly academia, is deprivation, is poverty. And you see that a lot. And this has happened because of, you know, the justice system. The justice system comes down harder on communities of color and the Black community, and that limits the potential for education. You know, I have a sister-in-law who is a tutor in London, and unfortunately, because of the deprivation in that particular area where the school is, half of her time is just making sure that her students are safe. And the reason it's not safe is because it's a low socioeconomic area. Policing is nowhere near as good. Neither is the health system. Neither is the social housing. So if the foundations aren't there for these communities, there's absolutely no way that they're going to be able to access the, you know, the internships that other people will be able to afford, particularly those in white areas where, you know, they are of a higher socioeconomic income, and so they receive better healthcare. The schools are better, policing is better. The general therefore the general sense of community feeling is a little less divisive, and I think this is a holistic thing. But we live in a super conservative country, relatively speaking, at least compared to our European neighbours, and a lot of the division has to do with it comes right from the top, you know, right from the top downwards, and there are unfortunately token gestures that are made that seem to paper over the cracks, or you know, they pay lip service, but nothing is actually done. Lives aren't being changed, opportunities aren't being given, and I think it's up to the people who have that power to make that change. It's our responsibility. So you know, I think it's something, especially in the music industry, I think we white artists, and especially we white male artists, have to do a lot of the hard work, and a lot of that hard work is actually making room to be able to step aside and hand over the microphone.
So cool. You heard it here first. Something is coming.
It's a little, I'm sorry for the vagary, but
no,
yeah.
no, people wanted more. Thanks so much. Yeah, Amelia, did you want to come in on that one as well, or add?
I feel like that was a perfect perfect answer, so I don't have anything to add.
Fantastic. Like, awesome. Well, then I think I've like looking at the questions that we've got, I think we've got time maybe for 2 more, and what I'll do is I'll like pull together some from one chunk and I think and another. And I think we've got I've got a thumbs up from Jane, like timekeeping. I'm just enjoying it, and I can see that no one's left, so I'm just going to keep going for these last 2 questions. The next ones we have are around the UBI, actually, just some questions following on from, of course, like the work that you did in spring, mobilizing and bringing together performers, musicians, and the Musicians Union to call on Rishi Sunak for a basic income. And we've got a few questions on this. One person just asking, what was the response from your followers and other people that you're reaching out to when you were trying to put this together? And how can we continue to keep up these kind of radical calls for change across the sector and ensure workers' voices are heard at the heart of this? I guess that kind of touches on what you were saying earlier. And someone has also asked, like, around the UBI, the Green Party and Greens, we've been pushing for this for a while, but it's also really important that we don't treat it as a complete panacea to the issues at hand. And they have a kind of question about what kind of other systems of support or policies or like options should there be in place to help people particularly hoping to get into the arts, is their question. So a few questions around response to the UBI and how we can kind of like move that forward.
I think where it concerns me and discussing UBI, I mean, I received wholesale approval from fellow artists who understood the value of it and thought that it was an essential idea, particularly where it concerns creating environments where opportunities for access to the arts would otherwise never have been provided. So, you know, UBI would mean that it would create a situation where it's an activity, even, you know, if it was just a pure act of expression in a rehearsal room, because someone would be able to afford the instruments required to, you know, indulge that expression. I indulge is the wrong word. It's really, it's a right, actually. But where it concerns people and fans, and I'm super conscious of criticizing my own fans, and it's not something I want to do lightly, but there were a number of people, especially on our Facebook page, who were averse to the idea, and simply because they saw it as a socialist policy, and they saw it as a communist policy. And what we're facing at the moment is a complete misrepresentation of socialist policy, because the online discourse has gone so far to the right. It's become reductionist, it's become sensationalist and incendiary. So there are kind of scare tactics where it concerns, I don't know, creating an equal society for all. So, you know, there were certain people who would say, well, this is just basically a communist idea, and, you know, we live in a capitalist society. And my argument would be, well, maybe we, you know, as an artist, I envisage a little, you know, something better for my fellow musician hopefuls. You know, I imagine myself in my position when I was younger. I was fortunate. If I weren't fortunate, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be making the albums that you are currently enjoying, you know, that you or ostensibly enjoy because you've signed up to our Facebook page. So it was mixed, unfortunately. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that a policy like UBI has been portrayed. And we are fighting an unwinnable game with the media and with politicians, because it's kind of, it's a vicious circle. The press will always demonize such an idea as socialist because they suspect that the public, the electorate, views socialist policy as bad, you know, that actually, like, enterprise is a really good thing, but they've not accounted for the fact that actually socialized policies like social housing, which saved my family, the NHS, which has saved every single one of our lives, probably, unless you're in the top tier of society, and you can afford private healthcare, and state comprehensives. These are socialized policies. And actually we partake in those every single day, and they're not, you know, we're not being Stalinized or anything like that. And at the same time, because the press are presuming that, you know, that's what the public believe, they're also, because their interests are based in perpetuating those sorts of ideas about socialized policies, they'll spout that, and so the electorate will see these headlines, and they will, because, you know, we're mammals, we're pattern finding creatures, we are defensive and territorial creatures. We become fearful because we see these headlines, and so we go, well, they're saying it, so obviously it's true. So it's this, we need to break this vicious cycle of reducing these really good ideas to headlines, or using scare tactics. But again, that's like, I just don't know how we're going to defeat that. I don't know how we're going to change it. You know, thankfully, because of Meghan Markle and Harry bravely stepping forward and saying, listen, this is like, systemic racism is real. The monarchy is inherently racist and colonialist, and they're afraid of the right-wing press. That they have opened this festering wound that everyone had been just ignoring for so long. And it's so true. UK, on a you know, you go outside the UK, you go to America, you go to Germany or wherever, the way that the UK press is perceived by these people is they abhor it. But we can't see it because we're stuck in that whirlwind. So I think a part of it has to do, and this is just a really roundabout way of saying, normalizing the feasibility of UBI is essentially it. Is just to keep talking about it as an extremely realistic idea. It is so realistic, people just have no idea.
Fab. Thanks so much, Billy.
The other topic I like talking about for hours is media reform, for that very reason.
Oh my goodness. And it's sort of on the horizon, isn't it? I after I watched the Oprah interview, I thought, my goodness, is it coming? Is change coming? Are we finally gonna, and the Society of Editors refuse to acknowledge the obvious patent racism that is on the newsstands every single day. And people went, no, you're wrong. That it is racist. We can see it's racist. So it does feel like some sort of cultural change is happening. Even if it's a slow turn, it does feel like it's going, but we just need to keep that momentum.
Absolutely. And going to the question that was on UBI, UBI isn't a silver bullet to every single problem. And I think that, even with homelessness, things like a housing first policy will ensure that we're able to tackle that, to make sure that people who are sleeping rough on our streets have a home, a roof over their heads, and money in their pocket, giving them an opportunity to rebuild their lives. Well, to not end up in that situation. We've talked about unpaid internships. If there was a universal basic income, it should not be an excuse for unpaid internships. People should be paid equally for the work they do. Young people should be paid equally for the work that they do. We need to have rent caps to make sure that we need a genuine living wage as well for everybody. We need rent caps to make sure that we aren't just at the mercy of landlords rising rents and eating into our lives, really. There's so many policies that need to go hand in hand, and we've talked about the need for system change, and this entire system at the moment is broken. A universal basic income tackles many issues. One of them is obviously the rise of automation as well, that work just simply isn't the same as it was 10 years ago, let alone kind of 50, 100 years ago, when many of the systems we work with now have been created. And yeah. I think I froze, but it's got all of these things need to work together. It can't just be a universal basic income on its own. And but the first point is to acknowledge that there's an issue, and I think that that's the point that hopefully we'll be getting to, more people are growing to appreciate.
Yeah, thank you so much, both. And like, it's so nice to hear as well. It really resonates, I think, with the series of talks and the themes that we've been kind of exploring as part of this kind of political education program, like recognizing the interconnections between these issues and actually the same structural forces that are causing, you know, difficulties with in terms of corrupt landlords or dodgy landlords are the same that are causing the climate crisis, the same forces, the kind of neoliberal capitalist need to create profit that is kind of like exploiting people and planet, and we're trying to like hopefully move towards like building like connections through these talks, through these events, through our online events, to try and like mobilize young people to take action like in our communities, but like understanding the kind of broader structures that like hold this stuff together. So I thought maybe it's a good move to like our final questions come around like the kind of the fight back, I suppose, and around in particular like union organizing as well. And we're going to have like a quick shout out from Sam Murray at the end as well, one of who's on the call, involved in the Musicians Union and the Trade Union Congress Young Workers as well. So like there are cool things to get involved with. But one person has written in and said, Billy's talk really resonated with me. I ended my career in the arts because I was from a working class background and a carer who couldn't afford to live on an insecure income on temporary contracts. How complicit are employers in the arts sector in this, and how can we campaign for employers to pay their workers properly and end volunteering and internships to give artists the security they need to continue their careers? And then someone else has just also said, when the arts sector is becoming more, and thank you to that person for sharing that with us, that was like really, really great. And like really useful and valuable to hear like the reality of the issue that we face. So thank you for sharing. But the second question is around when working in the arts sector is becoming more and more precarious and more like a kind of gig economy, it's a real challenge for traditional trade unions to organize workers. And the question is, how can we overcome this and mobilize workers across the sector? Can we learn from more kind of informal worker campaigns like the delivery riders and the Uber drivers campaign as well? So a couple of questions about like the kind of the fight back.
I think that there's been long-term exploitation of artists by the biggest gatekeepers in the industry, which is the record labels. And an example of just how lowly artists have been considered in the whole scheme of things is that when streaming started to take off, or initially peer-to-peer networking, so platforms like LimeWire, so record sales were depleting, and rather than looking inwards, record labels decided that they were going to keep the current structure, but what they were going to do is they were going to take more of artists' revenue. So instead of, say, going, oh, maybe we should invest in working out streaming services that are owned by the record labels or something like that, subscription based, they said, no, we're going to take the gross income from your merch sales on tour because you're not selling the records now. And we're going to pass the burden of earning back onto the artist, who it's already difficult enough paying back the record labels for advances and recording contracts and recording costs and the like. And as well as this, publishing, which is where most artists earn their money, which is garnered from live performances of the songs that they write, and radio play, syncing, plays on adverts and TV shows, movies, that kind of thing. Record labels decided that also they were going to try and take a portion of that. So they ended up coming with something called a 360 deal, where so you want to sign a record deal with us, with this big record company, you want to use our distribution network, you want to use our marketing services, then you're going to have to give us all this stuff, and all of that stuff would be signing over your future earning potential, essentially your rights, your publishing rights, your merch rights, over for a straight fee. So you essentially became an artist who was waged by the record label. And that continued, and what we see now is a dissipation of the recording industry as we know it, because record labels refused to see the change coming, and instead of being reflective about it, they decided to, you know, pass on the losses to the artists. So there is a big problem with exploitation in the record industry, which I think is starting to be equalized now. I mean, you're seeing artists achieving fame by using platforms like SoundCloud. I mean, that's how Billie Eilish became really popular, is because she and her brother Finn decided, no, we're going to, you know, put our songs up here, and if people like them, and then, you know, record labels came to them and they held the power. And I think that's really where a lot of the artists' power lies, is being able to or just being able to set the rights for themselves, you know. Places like Bandcamp, which means that artists run they upload their songs, they can sell CDs from Bandcamp, they can sell merch from Bandcamp, and they receive, and you know, I think there's a commission that the platform take, but it's where I primarily get my music from now. It's where I find some of my favorite artists. I'm heavy into synthwave, and I'm, you know, this obscure Estonian synthwave artist who's just uploaded their record and I think is absolutely incredible. I give them all my money, you know, and I buy t-shirts and everything, and it feels like a real equalizing factor. But again, you know, everything is beholden to capitalism. So it really is about finding ways and educating artists of the options that are open to them, you know, because an awful lot of the time we were young when we signed, and we were just bowled over by the idea that record labels wanted our signatures. So, you know, we had to be really calmed down by our lawyers, and luckily we were able to get lawyers at that time. But yeah, that was of a different age. So I'm finding it really difficult. You know, it's something that I'm finding I'm as I learn more, I know less and less about, because it is so quick paced. So it's just something that we all need to keep our ears and eyes open for. And yeah, it's a difficult one, and I don't know a lot about the changes that are being made and regulations that are being sought. But yeah, it's tough. It's horrible.
No, thanks. But like, really interesting to hear about the kind of like building these alternatives, creating new ways of working, new spaces to do things differently, to challenge the the norms, is just really exciting to see and to hear about. So thanks so much for that, Billy. Yeah, lots to take on there, I'm sure. Like,
I'm such a pessimist though. I'm always like, oh, it's just a mess.
Not when we've got like events like these, people like you speaking out. I think it's really exciting. So thank you so much for taking the time. But yeah, Amelia, jump in if you like.
I just feel like maybe a bit of optimism and faith to the pessimism is the second part of the question, unstable, which I believe was how you support unions and grassroots movements. And I've said it 100 times before, but I've said it again. I really dislike that slogan, the keep calm and carry on one. It's been everywhere, like on tea towels. Someone told me they had it on a pair of pants, coffee, like mugs. It's just everywhere. But like, to me, I really think that what we should be thinking is get angry and get organized, because that's what I see around me. I see so much that makes me angry, and the only way we're going to tackle that is by being organized and supporting those people who are organized. So get involved with unions, amplify the voices of people who are organized, because I think that's the only way that we're going to tackle a lot of that pessimism, is when we operate together. It makes us stronger, it makes us bigger and stronger than the systems that we are trying to work against. And so yeah, just get involved.
Awesome. What a note to end on. Thank you so much, both of you. Can we have another wave of applause? And you know where the emoji buttons are. I don't know if you're on camera. That was just incredible, both. Thank you so much for such a valuable conversation. And like, I'm just like already excited about clipping this and putting it all over social media. But we have, as you said, Amelia, like on the topic of getting organized, we have got Sam Murray here, who's just going to give a shout out a little bit about some work that is kind of so related to this talk and discussion and your previous work, that I'm excited to introduce Sam for a quick shout out about what else is happening and how we can get involved in supporting.
Thank you very much, Rosie. So I just want to talk about a couple of things for those of you who are involved in trade unions, and those of you who aren't involved in trade unions can campaign around. So first of all, I've managed to bring a motion to the Musicians Union Conference to finally formally get the Musicians Union to support UBI and actually do a proper campaign about it for once. So we could do with as much support on social media when the conference is happening a little bit later in the summer. But if anyone's willing to get involved and give us a hand as early as possible and spread the word on social media, please do. Also, if you are in another trade union, there's also what's called the TUC Young Workers Forum coming up, and they're having a big conference, and the Musicians Union have put in a couple of really big motions. Unfortunately, it's really sad to say that the Trade Union Congress is very much focused on people who are in normal full-time employment, whereas those who are self-employed often do get overlooked within the trade union movement. So we're trying to address this balance with a motion that's really calling for more inclusion of self-employed and freelance workers in the campaigning the Trade Union Congress do. And then also we're picking up on a really big topical issue that I'm sure both Amelia and Billy have loads to say on, and that's about trying to get songwriters, composers and performers an actually decent fee from streaming, from Spotify and other platforms as well. So we've got a big motion coming up about that. So if you are in a trade union, please make voices to your young workers leaders about this. I can share the information with Rosie and to put that on as well. And then the final thing I really want you to encourage you to do is to please get involved in the campaign to elect Amelia to the Senedd. And the reason I say this is because Wales is one of the biggest places and opportunities we have to actually trial and introduce UBI. Wales also has some of the most progressive ideas regarding music policy. And just imagine what would happen if we had not only Amelia as a Senedd member, but Amelia sitting on the Culture, Welsh Language and Communications Committee, telling them why we need much better policy to support the arts as well. So I'd really encourage everybody to do anything they can to get involved in Amelia's campaign. Amelia has done just so many things for creative workers, for the self-employed, for musicians, that imagine having Amelia elected to the Senedd and the amazing work that could be done. So please, please, please get involved.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, well said, and congrats on all that work, Sam. It is so exciting. So thank you so much for sharing it, and good luck to you. And we will be sending round links to all of you who signed up for more information on how to get involved. But yes, we are moving very, very quickly into our election campaign, and I'm very excited to be starting to talk with Amelia about how the Young Greens can really power that campaign. So if you are interested and excited to get involved, keep your eyes peeled, because there will be plenty to do. From satellite, from like down on the ground in Wales. We will, there's lots more to come. But do not leave yet. I still have a number of quick shout outs for